If you believe in second chances and the power of love that transcends life, subscribe and leave a like. Your story of hope could be next. The last of the autumn light bled from the sky, surrendering the streets of Harmony Creek to the orange and purple glow of Halloween. From behind the large glass window of the storykeeper, Clara watched as miniature ghosts and goblins scurried past, their laughter a bright, sharp sound against the quiet hum of her own grief. A year. It had been a full year since Michael was gone, and the silence he left behind was a physical weight, most especially within the four walls of the bookstore they had built together. This was supposed to be their night. Halloween at the Storykeeper had been a town tradition. Michael would dress up as Edgar Allan Poe, reading a slightly less terrifying version of The Raven to wide-eyed children, while Clara served hot cider and pumpkin-shaped cookies. The store would be alive, buzzing with energy, the scent of cinnamon and old paper mingling in the air. Tonight, the only scent was the faint aroma of dust and the cold finality of the unpaid bills stacked neatly on the counter beside her. The pile was a monument to her failure. A crisp white envelope from the bank lay on top, its bold red lettering a fresh wound. Final notice. They had poured everything into this place. Their savings, their dreams, their shared belief that a town needed a place where stories could live and breathe. Michael had built the towering oak shelves himself, his hands, usually so gentle, expertly crafting each joint and curve. He'd called them ladders to other worlds. Now those ladders felt impossibly steep, and Clara was too tired to climb. Her eyes drifted across the store, a landscape of their shared history. There was the cozy armchair in the corner where they'd read aloud to each other on rainy Sundays. There was the children's section, painted a cheerful sky blue, where they daydreamed about reading to their own kids one day. And then there was the shelf, right by the counter that held their sacred texts, the 6 books that told the story of them. First was a slim volume of Pablo Neruda's poetry. Michael had recited a verse from it on their first date, his voice a little shaky but his eyes confident and full of a light that made her feel like the only person in the universe. Next to it was a dog-eared travel guide to the Italian countryside, its pages filled with their highlighted notes and whispered plans for a honeymoon they never took. Then came their mutual favorite, To Kill a Mockingbird, its spine broken from countless readings. Beside it, a beautifully illustrated copy of The Velveteen Rabbit, which Michael had bought the day they decided they were ready to start a family. The 5th was a dense local history book from which they'd plucked the store's name, The Storykeeper. And last, at the end of the row, was a modern fantasy novel, the one Michael had been reading before the diagnosis came and stole all their future chapters. A fresh wave of grief washed over her, so potent it was nauseating. Running the store without him was like trying to read a book with half the pages ripped out. The narrative was broken. The joy was gone. She was failing him. She was failing their dream. The community loved the store. People always said so. This place is the heart of the town, Clara, they'd tell her as they bought a coffee and a paperback. But sentiment didn't pay the electricity bill or satisfy the bank. The convenience of online behemoths and the cut-price deals of superstores were a tide she couldn't turn back. A loud rap on the window startled her. A tiny witch with a gap-toothed grin and a boy dressed as a firefighter waved enthusiastically before being pulled along by their parents. Clara forced a smile, a painful stretch of unused muscles, and waved back. Their joy felt like a foreign language. She turned the sign in the window from open to closed, the click of the lock echoing in the cavernous silence. Alone now, truly alone, she walked back to the counter and sank into the old wooden stool, burying her face in her hands. The tears she'd been holding back all day finally came, hot and bitter. She wept for Michael, for the stories they'd never finish, for the crushing weight of the debt that was about to swallow the last piece of him she had left. Exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness born of grief and anxiety, finally claimed her. Her head drooped, and with the scent of paper and the ghostly echo of children's laughter in her ears, Clara fell asleep. Her dream was not of ghouls or graves. It was of light. The Storykeeper was bathed in a warm, ethereal glow, the kind of light that only exists in the moments just after sunrise. The dust motes danced in the air like tiny golden sprites, and he was there. Michael stood by the poetry section, not as she remembered him in those last painful days, frail and fading, but as he was in his prime, strong, vibrant, his familiar flannel shirt rolled up to the elbows. He wore the gentle, lopsided smile that had first captured her heart. He didn't speak, but his presence was more comforting than any words. The crushing weight on her chest lifted, and for the first time in a year she could breathe. He turned and looked directly at her, his eyes full of a love so profound it felt like a physical embrace. He raised a hand, not to wave, but to beckon her to watch. He began to walk through the familiar aisles of their store. His movements were calm, deliberate. He glided past the fiction bestsellers, his fingers ghosting over their spines before turning towards the counter. He stopped directly in front of their special shelf, the 6 books that were their history. Slowly, reverently, he reached out and touched the Neruda book of poetry. As his fingers made contact, a number bloomed in Clara's dream mind, clear as a bell. 7. He moved to the Italian travel guide. 18. Then, To Kill a Mockingbird. 31. He paused, his gaze meeting hers again, a look of gentle urgency in his eyes. He touched The Velveteen Rabbit. 22. The local history book. 45. Finally, he laid his hand on the cover of the fantasy novel, the last book he ever held. The final number settled in her consciousness. 9. He had given her 6 numbers. He offered one last radiant smile, a smile of reassurance, of peace, of farewell, and walked toward the front door. He didn't open it, but seemed to dissolve into the morning light that was now pouring through the glass, leaving Clara bathed in its warmth. Clara awoke with a gasp, her heart hammering against her ribs. The bookstore was dark and cold again. The warmth of the dream was gone, but the feeling of his presence lingered, so real she could almost smell the faint, comforting scent of sandalwood and cedar that always clung to his clothes. The dream had been so vivid, so real, and the numbers, they were still there, burned into her memory. Her hand trembled as she fumbled for a pen, grabbing a crumpled receipt from the counter. She scribbled them down before the logic of the waking world could erase them. 7, 18, 31, 22, 45, 9. She stared at the numbers, a hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat. It was just a dream, a product of a grieving, exhausted mind desperately trying to find meaning, to see a sign, any sign. It meant nothing. She was about to crumple the receipt and toss it into the overflowing trash bin when her eyes landed again on the red-lettered envelope from the bank. Desperation was a cold, sharp thing. It cut through reason and logic. What did she have to lose? In her coat pocket was a $10 bill she'd saved for milk and bread for the next 2 days. The corner market, with its garish fluorescent lights and humming lottery machine, was still open. It was an insane idea, a fool's errand, but it was also a message. Maybe not from beyond the grave, maybe just from the deepest part of her own heart, but it was something. A flicker of a story in the suffocating darkness. It wasn't about the money. It was about honoring the dream. It was about taking one last, desperate, hopeful step guided by his memory. Clutching the receipt in her hand like a sacred text, Clara grabbed her coat, unlocked the door, and stepped out into the chilly Halloween night, leaving the dark, silent bookstore behind her. The days that followed the lottery ticket purchase were a strange, suspended reality for Clara. The flimsy slip of paper sat on her bedside table, a paradox of immense potential and utter foolishness. She went through the motions of running the bookstore, greeting the few customers who trickled in with a polite but distant smile. The numbers, 7, 18, 31, 22, 45, 9, a constant humming refrain in the back of her mind. She told no one. The act of buying the ticket felt too sacred, too personal, a final secret conversation with Michael. To speak of it would be to break the spell. Doubt was a persistent, unwelcome guest. She would look at the ticket and see nothing more than a desperate whim, a symptom of her grief. Then, she would look at the 6 books on their shelf, and the memory of the dream would return with breathtaking clarity. The warm light, the love in Michael's eyes, the deliberate certainty of his gestures. It was a memory that felt more real than her waking life. The night of the drawing, she couldn't bring herself to watch it live. The thought of seeing those numbers fail to appear felt like a second, unbearable loss. Instead, she made a cup of tea and sat in the quiet of the empty bookstore, holding Michael's favorite copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. She eventually fell asleep in the armchair, the book resting on her chest. She woke in the cold pre-dawn hours, a crick in her neck and a sense of dread in her stomach. With trembling fingers, she unlocked her phone and navigated to the state lottery website. The page loaded with agonizing slowness, and then, there they were, the winning numbers, displayed in a bold, digital font. 7, 18, 31, 22, 45, 9. Clara stared, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. She read the numbers again, and again. She pulled the ticket from her pocket, her hand shaking so violently she could barely hold it steady. She compared the numbers one by one, her breath catching in her throat. They matched. All of them. A sound escaped her lips, not a shout of joy, but a choked, disbelieving sob. It was real. The dream, the message, the impossible, miraculous chance. It was all real. Tears streamed down her face, tears of shock, of relief, of a grief so profound it had been momentarily eclipsed by an even more powerful emotion. Wonder. She wasn't just holding a winning lottery ticket. She was holding the last thing Michael had ever given her. The weeks that followed were a blur of quiet, careful planning. There was no grand announcement, no popping champagne corks. After consulting with a lawyer and a financial advisor, both recommended by the discreet lottery officials, Clara claimed her prize anonymously. The sum was staggering, more money than she could truly comprehend. But her first thoughts weren't of mansions or sports cars or exotic vacations. Her first thought, the only one that mattered, was of the bookstore, of the red-lettered final notice from the bank. Her first act as a multimillionaire was to walk into Harmony Creek's local bank. She didn't look like a lottery winner. She was just Clara, the quiet woman who ran the bookstore, dressed in her usual jeans and a worn-out sweater. With a single-wire transfer, she paid off the business loan in full. The loan officer, a man who had been treating her with strained pity for months, stared at his computer screen in stunned silence. For Clara, there was no sense of triumph, only a deep, quiet sense of peace. The storekeeper was safe. Michael's legacy was safe. With the financial pressure gone, Clara's grief began to transform. The sharp edges softened, replaced by a sense of purpose. The money wasn't a solution to her sorrow, but it was a tool. It was a chance to do more than just save the bookstore. It was a chance to make it thrive, to turn it into the vibrant heart of the community they had always dreamed it could be. She closed the store for renovations, a sign on the door promising a new chapter coming soon. She hired a local architect, a woman who understood that the goal wasn't to erase the store's soul, but to enhance it. They kept Michael's hand-built oak shelves, refinishing them until the wood glowed. They knocked down a non-load-bearing wall to create a small, cozy cafe in the back, filling the space with comfortable chairs and the rich aroma of coffee and freshly baked pastries. The children's section was expanded with a small, whimsical stage for story hours. An upstairs storage room was converted into a bright, airy workshop space for writing groups and book clubs. During the renovation, Clara found herself drawn back to the 6 books. One quiet evening, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and fresh paint, she pulled the volume of Neruda from the shelf and opened it to page 7. And there it was, underlined in Michael's familiar pencil scrawl. "I want to do with you what spring does with the cherry trees," the line he had recited on their first date. Her breath hitched. She picked up the Italian travel guide and turned to page 18. It was a map of a small sun-drenched village in Tuscany, a place they had circled in red ink, dreaming of opening a tiny bed and breakfast there one day. She moved to Kill a Mockingbird, page 31. A single sentence was highlighted, a quote from Atticus Finch. "You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it." It was a passage they had discussed endlessly, a cornerstone of their shared philosophy on empathy. Page 22 of The Velveteen Rabbit described the moment the rabbit becomes real through love. Page 45 of the local history book detailed the founding of the town library, the very act that had inspired them to name their store The Storykeeper. And finally, on page 9 of the fantasy novel, the protagonist received a quest, a mission that would give his life meaning against impossible odds. Clara sank to the floor. The books spread around her, and wept. The numbers weren't random. They were a map, a final story. Michael hadn't just given her the means to save their dream. He had reminded her of why it mattered. It was about love, adventure, empathy, community, and purpose. It was the story of them, encoded in a language only she could understand. The grand reopening of The Storykeeper was held on a crisp Saturday in late spring. The entire town, it seemed, had turned out. The renovated space was buzzing with life and warmth. Children sat mesmerized as a local author read on the new stage. Parents sipped lattes in the cafe, and teenagers browsed the shelves. The bookstore was no longer silent. It was filled with the music of a thriving community. Clara stood near the entrance, her heart full. She watched a young couple holding hands as they looked through the poetry section. She saw a father reading to his daughter in the armchair where she and Michael used to sit. This was it. This was everything. The town mayor insisted she say a few words. Standing before the crowd, her voice soft but steady, she didn't mention the lottery. She spoke of second chances. She spoke of how stories connect us, how they keep memories alive, and how a physical place dedicated to them can be the heart of a town. This place was built on a foundation of love, she said, her eyes sweeping over the familiar faces, and it's been rebuilt by the spirit of this community. The Story Keeper is for all of you. It is dedicated to the loving memory of my husband, Michael, who believed more than anything in the power of a good story. Later that evening, long after the last customer had gone, Clara stood alone in the center of the store. The lights were low, the air filled with the contented quiet of a well-loved space. She ran her hand along one of Michael's shelves, feeling the smooth, strong wood beneath her fingertips. She was no longer just the store's owner. She was its keeper, its guardian. The money hadn't erased her pain, but it had allowed her to build something beautiful from it. It had given her a new chapter. She looked at their 6 books, now displayed in a special glass case near the counter. The true prize wasn't the fortune in her bank account. It was the message he had sent her across the veil. Their story wasn't over. And in this place, surrounded by the love of her community and the silent company of a million other stories, she would make sure it never would be. The true prize wasn't the money, but Michael's final message. The love they had built was real, enduring, and strong enough to echo through time and grief. The luck didn't come from chance, but from the deep connection they shared. The money gave Clara the freedom to save their legacy, the bookstore, and transform it into a beacon of hope for the community, proving that the greatest riches are the memories we honor and the future we build from them. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and give it a like so we can continue to share tales of hope and destiny.